Hello, everybody. Just making a new video, recording from Montreal, where I'm staying. I've been here for a couple of months now. I guess if you can vaguely see the view behind me, that's Montreal behind me, or part of it. Anyway, I would record outside, but it's pouring with rain right now. Before this, I was actually in Paris for 3 months, so it's been a while, almost 6 months since I was in Iceland, but we'll be returning very soon. But the reason I'm making this video is I wanted to talk about my new book. This is Dialectics of the Big Bang and the Absolute Existence of the Multiverse from the University of Alberta Press, and released quite recently, or back in May. Been intending to talk about this, and so I figured I would do this before I come home. And this book, well, I'm probably just going to give more of a kind of a personal story about how I came to write it. This book, I started it 4 years ago. So that's typical, I would say, for an academic book. And it was a pandemic book in a sense, because I started it, I remember very clearly, it was summer of 2020 when everything was shutting down. That's when I really first started working on this book in earnest. And I guess there must have been larger forces at work there. But I've since forgotten, what the particular driving force for me was. All I know is that I'd been reading books on cosmology for a while, but just mostly casually. And when I say books on cosmology, I mean the kinds of books that scientists write for general audiences. Those books have been around for a couple of decades now. And scientists, I think part of the reason why they write these books about the Big Bang Theory or string theory or quantum physics or whatever it might be, part of the reason is that they want to introduce these ideas to the general public. There's this idea that the general public should know about some of these ideas without the heavy-duty math and physics, and so a lot of these scientists write what I would call narratives. They're basically stories that take the information and put it into a kind of digestible form. And those are the kinds of books that, as I say, I was reading casually. But 4 years ago, I started getting more into them. I was interested in them from a kind of a literary standpoint, but even more specifically from a philosophical standpoint, because I felt as though these books were touching upon some rather big issues in philosophy, such as the origins of existence, for example. I mean, the Big Bang Theory, in particular, speaks about the inception of being as we understand it. And these books also talk about things like the basic structure of space and time, but obviously coming at it from a scientific standpoint. But I thought that there was a potential intersection there with philosophy. And so around this time, I started reading more of these books and thinking about these ideas. And I really felt that there was a project there, a way to develop a narrative about the beginning of the universe from a kind of literary, philosophical narrative standpoint. So I became very interested in particular in the first second in the history of the universe, because the first second was a very eventful period, as it turns out, according to the kind of consensus narrative. During its very first second of existence, 13.8 billion years ago, because that's when the Big Bang is said to have happened, during the first second, the universe is said to have passed through no less than 6 different epochs. So sort of 6 stages of growth and development, just this rapid fire movement and transition, changing profoundly, entering new states, all in the duration of 1 second. And the reason that happened is because the universe expanded and cooled so radically, so fast, that it led to a whole series of different changes. And so I was interested in giving a kind of philosophical account of the universe's high-speed transitions, because I thought it was really interesting that this is the period when existence as we understand it kind of came on the scene. The basic structure of space and time, the fundamental forces, the elementary particles, all of these things became operational at this moment. And I think that they can tell us something about basic questions of ontology, meaning the study of existence. So it really was 4 years ago that I got into these ideas. And once I started really reading these books kind of in earnest, in detail, taking notes, once I started putting it together in my mind, it really took hold of me. I really became quite exhilarated at not just the project, but the journey of discovery, the kind of movement towards growth and knowledge, because in the end, that's kind of what it's all about. And these ideas, thinking about them, keep in mind too, I was kind of entering not just a different field, but a different discipline, because my background is literature and philosophy, and I was looking at cosmology, and I became very excited about just what I was learning, and I felt like I was learning so much, and I have to tell you, it just ignited my imagination. It thrilled me in a way that I hadn't been since grad school, I would say. And here's, I think, an important point when it comes to talking about working on a book. Don't let anyone tell you that reading and researching are dull, fusty activities, because they're not. For people who are interested in these things, they can be exciting and exhilarating activities. They can be things that sort of set you free in your mind and your imagination. You can feel like a surfer riding a wave, or anybody where their work comes together in the most fulfilling and exciting way. You can feel as though these connections are building, the lights are coming on, and you feel as though you're standing in the middle of a carnival. And it really is one of the best feelings in the world. And it truly is something to live for. As I say, if you pursue these things, if you're interested in these things, and I have such nostalgia now for that period in my life, which is kind of ironic because, 2020, right? I mean, I think people remember what that was like, and all sorts of things as well. For me, personally, and yet in many respects, I really felt as though I was in my element, and I wish that I could recapture that now. Because, I'd love to tell you that, bringing the book out, right, is the most exciting part, the most fulfilling part. But it's not really, at least not for me. There's something incredibly anticlimactic about it, although maybe that's just me personally. But now all my thoughts are towards how can I rekindle that kind of search for knowledge and the process of learning. How can I get back to that? That's what I'm really interested in doing right now. So the book itself, well, I'm not going to go through the different arguments or anything like that. I basically say, it's a narrative about the beginning of the universe. It's the first second. But I'll just speak a little bit about things that are interesting to me that do find their way into the book. Now, I say, as I mentioned, the dialectics of the Big Bang and the absolute existence of the multiverse. So the Big Bang, the beginning of our universe, but then the multiverse as well, which I think is a very interesting relationship. One of the most fascinating things about the Big Bang Theory, at least for me personally, is that it dates the universe. It tells us that the universe is only 13.8 billion years old. So it hasn't been around forever. Rather, it had a particular moment of inception. And I think that that's just so intriguing, because we're used to thinking of the universe as just being everything, right? Just everything that is outside of us, and it's so vast and so encompassing. Yes, but apparently it's finite and limited and also potentially mortal, just like everything else, right? We know nothing lasts forever. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. Even things that appear to be eternal, like the sun, right? I mean, it's not eternal, has not been around forever, will not be around forever. The same as the earth, the same as all of us, personally, individually, the same as humanity as a species. Finitude, right? Things that are limited in extent and duration. And the Big Bang Theory proposes that this universe had a particular moment of birth and thus is counted among the finite things. Yet on the other hand, you have the story of the multiverse. And I think part of what really strikes me about this is the Big Bang Theory is very entrenched in cosmology. I mean, there's near consensus support for it among scientists. Not universal, there are dissenting views, but most cosmologists adhere to the idea of the Big Bang Theory to explain not just the origins of the universe, but the makeup and structure of it. But I would say that the theory of the multiverse is almost as entrenched. I mean, that also enjoys really wide support. In fact, so much so that the multiverse has sort of entered the popular imagination a little bit as an idea. It gets depicted and spoken about. And the multiverse provides that all-important answer to the question of what preceded the Big Bang. Because if this universe is 13.8 billion years old, well, that's not forever, and surely something existed prior to the Big Bang. But as to what that something is, we have no idea. We're dealing with an incomplete text. We're just living in this one kind of sphere of existence, which is very large, make no mistake, but nonetheless not infinite, circumscribed and limited. And presumably outside of this universe, there are other forms, other modes of existence. The multiverse basically proposes that this is not the only universe in existence, that there are many other universes, in fact, an infinite number of other universes. Part of one of the things I wanted to consider in the book are some of the philosophical implications of thinking about an infinite multiverse, an infinite cosmic totality. I mean, there are things we can do to try and wrap our mind around that, but they basically reveal our limitations of thought and imagination. And here's something that I sometimes broach to my students to help us understand this. If there is indeed a multiverse, and it is infinite, this infinite cosmic totality, meaning no point of beginning, no point of end, no real boundaries or barriers. There are just different universes within it. Well, that means that existence is much older than 13.8 billion years. It's older than a trillion years or a quadrillion years. In fact, it's older than any number we can imagine. And let us try to imagine some of those numbers. You take, for instance, a Google of years. A Google is a familiar term. Obviously, it's actually a number. Yes, that is where the name of the company comes from. They refer to a Google, but they spell it a little bit differently. A Google is a number, a 1 with 100 zeros after it. That's a Google. So it's obviously a very big number. And can we imagine a very long tract of time, a Google of years, right? So way longer than the age of this universe. If the infinite multiverse is accurate, then a Google of years not only can pass, but in fact must pass. It has to pass. It has passed in the past and will do so again in the future. Now, that of course is just boggling, because how many different universes might exist across that ridiculous stretch of time? How many different stars, planets, living organisms, civilizations, assuming that other universes are similar to this one, but even if they're not, there would still be some overlap at some point. I mean, that kind of gives us a sense of the kinds of distances in time that we're speaking about. And we can even push that point further. We talk about a Google of years. What about a Googleplex of years? Google is a 1 with 100 zeros after it. A Googleplex is also a number that is a 1 with a Google of zeros after it. So it is a much bigger number. How much bigger? Well, let's think about it. You can certainly write out a Google if you want to. Just sit down, write 1, and then write 100 zeros after it, and there you go. You've written out a Google. It would be a considerable challenge to write out a Googleplex, though, to actually write out a Google of zeros. In fact, let's try to imagine doing that. Well, let's say that you need a lot of paper or a very big canvas to do that. In fact, you could imagine taking a canvas, hypothetically, and draping it all over the surface of the earth, covering everything, covering the land, the ocean, everything. And assuming you have all the time and stamina in the world, you could perhaps sit down and start writing out a Googleplex on that sheet of paper. So 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and keep going, keep going. Again, you have nothing better to do. Apparently you have all the endurance in the world. You just keep writing that number out, wrapping yourself all the way around the earth as you cover this sheet of paper. And by the time you have reached the end of it, would you have actually succeeded in writing out a Googleplex? Well, no, you would not. You would be nowhere close to actually writing that number out. how much bigger would we have to make this hypothetical canvas? Can you imagine expanding it so it's the size of the solar system or even the Milky Way galaxy, just wrapping itself around other stars and planets? And again, apparently you're an immortal being or something. You're sitting there writing 10000 on and on and on. Well, even then, you wouldn't reach the end of that number. There is not enough space in the universe to write out a googolplex. That is how long that number is. That's how many zeros there are in that number. Just staggering. And yet, keep in mind, it's finite. It does have an endpoint. It doesn't continue forever. You do eventually reach the end of that number. And so what does that tell us about the infinite multiverse, the cosmic totality? It tells us that a googolplex of years, yes, just like a Google of years, must pass. Has to pass. Inevitable that will happen, but also that is but a moment of eternity. That is less than a drop of water in the ocean. That astronomical length of time. Once you got to the end of a googolplex of years, or however many googolplexes of years, you've not taken a single step towards the end of the infinite. The implications for this, well, where to begin with the implications of this? Again, how many different universes out there? How many different star systems, planets? How many different possibilities? Potentially different dimensions, different elementary particles, fundamental forces, different versions of yourself even. This is something that people think about in relation to the multiverse. They think about it from a purely kind of materialistic standpoint. Here is a very materialistic understanding of a human being. You say a human being is basically a collection of these different parts that all fit together and work in unison. And you can actually, in theory, break us down into our individual parts. You have your skin, you got your bones and your entrails and your brains and all these things, and take it down to smaller and smaller levels so you can see all these things working in operation. You can imagine a person as a collection of cells, molecules, atoms, elementary particles, right? Just like everything else, we're composed of elementary particles, and the very materialistic vision that surfaces here is of a person as this kind of incredibly complex, kinetic, moving jigsaw puzzle of all these things working together. Okay, if the infinite multiverse is accurate, doesn't it stand to reason that this precise arrangement of matter and energy has existed somewhere else? Yes, absolutely. That has happened. Has to have happened because it's infinite. So it doesn't matter how unlikely that is. It doesn't matter how improbable it is. Obviously, it's incredibly unlikely, right? That you get all these elementary particles, bring them together into this precise composition. And yet, if you have an infinite amount of time, you will inevitably end up doing that. So we think in these terms. There is certainly not just a chance, but a very good chance that this precise being, this creature that you are, exists somewhere else in the multiverse right now. This world that we're in exists somewhere else in the multiverse. Not just you, but this civilization, this planet, this solar system, duplicate copies of the same things. Purely materialistic because there's no causal relationship. It's not as though you would somehow know what is happening to the other version of yourself on the other end of the multiverse. There isn't a spiritual tie because you're just the same thing, right? You're just the same collection of stuff, kind of like two identical snowflakes. And yet it lends itself to all sorts of philosophical and spiritual implications. Lends itself to the thought that we're actually functionally immortal beings. I mean, it's startling to say that because we know we're finite, we know we're mortal, definitely will one day die, and yet the being that you are perhaps will not die because you, this creature, always has to exist somewhere in the multiverse. The moments of your life always have to occur somewhere else in the multiverse. It's almost like we're inscribed on the face of existence. And this, I think, leads to an understanding of the relationship between things like the finite and the infinite. Finite, again, limited, mortal, won't be around forever. And, we speak about people, right? Just surface-dwelling mammals scurrying around on this rock, right, for a very tiny period of time, and yet connected to the infinite and striving towards the infinite as though on some level that's our real home, as though we're somehow intuitively aware that we actually dwell in the infinite, not just the finite. So those are just some of the ideas. I mean, just really a kind of improv kind of discussion of this book. As I say, it's been released. Hopefully do a book launch when I get back to Iceland soon. And if you're in one of my classes in the upcoming academic year, I'll see you soon.